Underneath the quiet hum of farm machinery and the timeless rhythm of planting and harvest, a storm is brewing, one that doesn't announce itself with thunder, but with silence. Silence at the ports, silence on the trading floor, silence in the bank offices where farmers used to walk in with pride. What if we told you that while headlines shouted about jobs and growth, entire trainloads of American agriculture were being quietly erased? That while press conferences bragged about national strength, the backbone of rural America, the family farm, was beginning to snap? And what if we told you that this wasn't a story about China or trade or tariffs, but about something deeper, something colder, something that started with a whisper and now threatens to drown out the heartbeat of America's farmland? Before we go further, pause, take a second, and subscribe to this channel right now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that doesn't make the evening news, but will shape the future of your grocery store, your paycheck, and your nation. It began with a simple announcement: another tariff, another number, another press release out of Washington. But what followed wasn't just a retaliation. It was a collapse. In the first 60 days of 2025 alone, U.S. sorghum exports to China, once the reliable lifeline for Kansas and Texas, didn't just dip. They disintegrated, from over 1.4 million tons to barely 78,000. A 94% plunge. That number isn't a typo. It's the sound of an entire industry gasping for breath. Silos that once overflowed with purpose now stand as tombstones of unsold grain. Markets vanished, contracts evaporated. Farmers, who had banked on relationships spanning 40 years, were left staring at figures in red ink and grain priced below cost. But that was just the start. On March 4th, Beijing imposed a 15% punitive tariff on $21 billion worth of American farm goods. By April 4th, that number ballooned to 34%, and with it came the suspension of licenses for major U.S. exporters. Containers were stranded, contracts canceled mid-shipment under force majeure, and, like a chain reaction, the fallout hit every corner of rural logistics. USDA data recorded a 42% surge in domestic sorghum stocks, pushing prices below corn, the cheapest staple. Export forecasts were slashed by more than half. Seed dealers demanded more upfront. Banks clamped down on lending. And just as planting season arrived, farmers were forced into an impossible gamble: plant sorghum and risk everything, or switch crops and pray the other markets didn't collapse too. It wasn't just sorghum. Soybeans, the titan of U.S. farm exports, were next. With China importing nearly $21 billion worth annually, the March 4th and April 10th tariff waves acted like a guillotine. Stocks surged to 380 million bushels, the highest in 4 years. The average soybean price dropped below $10.10 per bushel, down from $14.97 just months earlier. Margins disappeared. In Iowa and Illinois, silos filled with unsold beans, while South American ports in Santos were overloaded with record Chinese orders. Brazil, in just one quarter, shipped 17.7 million tons of soybeans, over 3/4 of all Chinese imports, leaving the Midwest in the dust. And then, Argentina signed a $900 million supply deal with China, carving even deeper into America's slice of the market. Farmers began bailing out. Some left land fallow. Others switched to corn or wheat, only to find themselves in the same trap. By late May, USDA reported something unseen in over 3 decades: negative wheat bookings. That's right, more cancellations than new contracts. South Korea pulled 65,000 tons. The Philippines canceled another 12,000. And yet, just days later, Manila signed a 110,000-ton deal with Australia. Cheaper? No. More trustworthy? Apparently, yes. Trust, once a quiet constant of American trade, has now become its most fragile asset. Milling giants in Seoul now pay a premium for Russian and Eastern European wheat, unwilling to gamble on America's unstable trade strategy. And the data doesn't lie. U.S. wheat's share of the global market has cratered, from 44% in 1980 to just 11% today. Meanwhile, Russia, despite sanctions, pushes past 40 million tons in exports and claims the crown for grain supply to Asia and the Middle East. Even with U.S. wheat trading $8, $12 cheaper per ton, buyers walk. Why? Because no one wants to play roulette with Washington's trade policy. Pause. Subscribe now. If you're still watching, you already know this is bigger than headlines. It's a systemic failure. Quiet, dangerous, and growing. Let's talk livestock. Nearly 1,000 U.S. meat processing plants have been left in limbo. China's export licenses expired, and renewals are nowhere in sight. That's $5 billion in deals on the edge. Every crate of beef, pork, or poultry now risks rejection, rot, or destruction. At Shanghai, new customs protocols forced every shipment to unload, unseal, and undergo tray-by-tray inspection. Spoilage soared. Storage charges jumped to $1,200 per container. Shipping delays tripled. Meat spoiled in port, while futures in Chicago plummeted. Hog prices dropped to an 8-month low. USDA data showed pork bookings with China tanked. Each cent of drop cost the sector $15 million monthly. Meanwhile, other markets moved on. Reefer ships were redirected to South America. Brokers dumped U.S. contracts. Domestically, meat flooded the market at discount prices, crushing local margins. USDA projections suggest that by 2026, hog prices will average just $63.50, below the break-even threshold. Chicken prices in the Southeast fell 7% in 1 month. Premium beef lost $2 per hundredweight in a single day, the same day the White House doubled meat tariffs to 50%. And still, plants cut shifts, workers were sent home, and production lines went cold. And yet, this may only be the midpoint. At U.S. ports, the damage is visible from space. Portland, Oregon, outbound shipments down 51%. Tacoma, Washington, minus 28%. Even the titanic port of Los Angeles saw a 17% decline. Empty containers vanished. Grain sat in storage. Kansas couldn't get sorghum to port. Iowa had beans but no boxes. At the same time, Washington proposed a tariff of $3 million per vessel built in China, causing ocean carriers like MSC to threaten to cut sailings altogether. Fertilizer costs spiked. Canada imposed a 25% retaliatory tariff on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, including combines, parts, and pesticides. The cruelest twist? 80% of U.S. potash comes from Canada. That means every ton now costs $100 more. A Nebraska corn farm must now spend $60,000 extra just to feed its soil. USDA froze credit lines. Support checks were delayed. One Montana farmer is trapped with $648,000 in feed mill loans. No way out. Credit across the Midwest is drying up. Bankers demand 15% more collateral. Some repossess land over just $40,000 in unpaid seed costs. Chapter 12. Farm bankruptcies are up 55% year over year. And there's no sign of slowing. Not in Kansas, not in Illinois, not in Texas. Still, think this is about tariffs? This is about survival. When you trap seed, block exports, inflate inputs, and gut credit lines, what you're building is not a trade wall. It's a supply chain prison. One where the crops rot in place, where the prices dive, where the trust evaporates, and where farmers, those who built the very idea of America as breadbasket of the world, watch their barns fall silent. Do you see it now? The sorghum crash, the soybean slide, the wheat exodus, the livestock collapse, the vanished vessels, the repossessed fields, the jobs lost not in headlines but in hushed conversations at the diner, the co-op, the farm bank, and all of it happening now. You still think this is temporary? That it'll fix itself? That the trade war is a clever game? Then tell that to the silos in Kansas, to the storage yards in Illinois, to the spoiled pork at Shanghai, to the 55 laid-off workers at Landis Cooperative, to the farm credit system now choking on substandard loans. America's agricultural heartland is being crushed, slowly, quietly, and comprehensively. Not by storms, not by drought, not even by war, but by policy, by the illusion of strength, and by the silence of those who should know better. We'll continue this report in the next segment. But before you go, subscribe now. Hit that like button if you believe these stories deserve to be heard, because what's coming next might hit even harder, and you won't want to miss what happens when the gates truly slam shut. And now the silence deepens. Out beyond the highways, past the grain elevators that no longer echo with truck horns or loading chains, there's a growing sense of something being lost. Not just money, not just business, but control. The quiet hum of devastation is no longer just audible in Kansas or Iowa. It's everywhere, across shipping routes, inside bank vaults, deep in legislative chambers where no one seems to be listening anymore. Have we really understood what's happening here? Have we even begun to measure the cost of turning agriculture into a weapon and the global food system into a battlefield? Look closer at the aftermath. It's not just the ports, the tariffs, the numbers, it's the lives behind them. What does a farmer do when last season's harvest hasn't left the warehouse, and this season's planting is already a loss on paper? What happens when input costs spike but output prices collapse? What does it mean when lenders quietly stop returning calls, when a tractor breaks down and the parts to fix it are sitting behind a 25% surcharge from a country that used to be a friend? These aren't hypotheticals. This is the reality across hundreds of thousands of square miles of rural America. And still, the spiral continues. In the Pacific Northwest, container shortages have now halted entire outbound cycles. The Port of Seattle has joined Portland in cutting vessel service frequencies, with stevedore unions quietly furloughing workers. Even when grain is loaded, it can't sail, not because there are no ships, but because ship owners refuse to risk docking without full cargo guarantees. And who's offering those now, when every buyer is backing out, every contract is being renegotiated, every port authority is bracing for the next announcement out of Washington or Beijing? And the bigger question, why aren't we hearing about it? Where are the press briefings now that American beef is sitting in Chinese customs coolers too long to pass safety inspections? Where is the national outcry when soybean futures slip below $10 and drag half the Midwest into a cash bleed? Where is the urgency when small-town mayors start talking about shutting down schools because the property tax base tied to agriculture has collapsed? Don't scroll away. This isn't old news. It's happening now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that button. Like the video. Comment if you or someone you know has been touched by this. Because what we're reporting here is something the mainstream refuses to follow through to the end. Let's dig into the broader implications. Fertilizer, as we've already seen, is turning into a geopolitical hostage. Potash, ammonia, urea, phosphates, all now part of a hidden tariff matrix where price isn't the only problem. Availability is. Rail routes into the U.S., from Canada and sea lanes from Morocco, and the Gulf states are being rebooked, redirected, reassessed. With uncertainty now baked into every bid, prices have soared. In some counties, the cost of prepping a single acre for corn is up over 24% in just 6 months. And that's before diesel, before seed, before the labor costs, which have also crept up due to shortages caused by an exodus from agriculture to more stable industries. How long do you think farmers will keep playing a game where every hand is dealt against them? In Nebraska, Iowa, Indiana, and the Dakotas, this season's planting is being called by some the ghost harvest, not because the crops won't grow, but because no one knows if they'll be able to sell them. Basis prices, the local premium or discount, applied to crop sales, are now negative across multiple counties. That means you not only earn less per bushel, you're sometimes paying to get it off your hands. This isn't marketing, it's economic triage. And the trickle effect is becoming a flood. When one farmer goes under, it's not just a field that goes fallow, it's the feed store that loses orders. It's the equipment dealer that misses a payment. It's the school that sees fewer kids, the gas station that sells fewer gallons, the diner that stops opening on Mondays. Rural collapse isn't a series of dramatic explosions. It's a quiet, suffocating contraction, and it's well underway. Meanwhile, on the global stage, competitors are stepping in aggressively. Brazil is expanding its port capacity at Paranagua. Russia is subsidizing logistics into Turkey and Vietnam. Australia is signing new bilateral grain protocols with Southeast Asia, while the U.S. slaps tariffs and tears up multilateral agreements. Other countries are building networks, quietly but effectively. And every day, America's agricultural dominance is shrinking, not just in volume, but in influence. How long can this last? How long can Washington pretend that these are isolated incidents instead of symptoms of systemic breakdown? What happens when the sorghum crash becomes the soybean rout, becomes the wheat hemorrhage, becomes the total fracture of the U.S. food export engine? And what does that mean for you? Because here's the thing. This isn't just about rural towns. This is about your supermarket, your meat aisle, your bakery, your morning eggs. When domestic supply piles up with no overseas buyer, prices don't stabilize, they collapse. Producers go bankrupt, supply tightens, and when it tightens, it rebounds in the wrong direction. Shortages, spikes, volatility. We've seen it before. We know the pattern. And still, no real action. No coordinated relief, no restructuring of the tariff regime, no emergency freight subsidies, no grain buyout programs, only band-aids, whispers, and speeches that avoid the word crisis, like it's a spell. But you know better. You're watching, you're listening, and you know what comes next, so don't let this story disappear. Subscribe, like, share, leave a comment below if you've seen the impact where you live. Because the system isn't just stressed, it's unraveling. And what we're watching may be the greatest collapse in American agriculture since the Dust Bowl. But this time, it wasn't a storm or a drought. It was decisions. Decisions made in boardrooms and briefings, behind podiums and policy walls. Decisions made without listening to the people who plant, raise, harvest, feed, ship, and sustain this country. The real Americans who get up before dawn to keep food moving, who now can't see how they'll survive the season. And if those decisions continue, then this isn't just a supply chain collapse. It's the end of an era. Stay with us. The next part of this story is even darker, and it's coming faster than anyone dares admit. So, here we are. The final mile, the last grain of truth before the storm becomes a flood, before the silence becomes abandonment. If you've come this far, you already understand that this isn't just a story about trade policy or agriculture or even economics. It's about something far more dangerous, a systemic unraveling that no one in power seems willing to name. And the scariest part? It might already be too late. Let's begin where most people never look. The financial arteries of the rural economy, community banks, agi credit unions, regional lenders. These are the veins that keep farms alive when rain doesn't fall or prices collapse. And right now, those veins are collapsing. Collateral is evaporating. Property valuations are tanking. Loan officers are quietly refusing refinancing requests that would have been routine last year. Why? Because no one wants to be the last bank holding a paper deed to land that won't produce value for the next 5 seasons. The data says it all. Default risk in the Midwest Farm Belt is at its highest since the late 1980s. And if you know your history, that's not just a statistic. That's a warning flare. Delinquencies on farm loans are climbing every quarter. The Farm Credit System, which supports over 40% of all U.S. agricultural lending, is sounding internal alarms. And yet, no bailout, no structural reform, no safety net for the people who feed the nation. Instead, there's a surreal disconnect, as if the government thinks food security is immune to math. It's not, and the math now says the foundation is crumbling. But what about insurance? Surely crop insurance will catch the fall. Right? Wrong. The way most federal agricultural insurance works, it assumes there's a functional market to sell into. But when you have sorghum at 94% collapse, soybeans beneath production cost, and wheat contracts actively canceled, what's the point of insurance if there's no buyer? What do you insure against? Failure to plant? or failure to exist. And while DC debates appropriations, farmers are debating exit strategies, not expansion, not innovation. Exit. Retire early. Sell the land. Liquidate the equipment. One major auction house reported a 26% year-over-year increase in forced sales of agricultural machinery in Q2 alone. Combines, seeders, irrigation rigs, once essential investments, now dumped for fractions of their value, just to cover diesel, feed, and mounting debt. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, competitors smell blood. Brazilian soybean growers are now offering 5-year fixed supply deals to Chinese state buyers. Australia has introduced a tariff-backed grain reserve program to stabilize wheat prices and guarantee supply to its Asian partners. Even smaller exporters, like Kazakhstan, are negotiating corridor access to bypass Russian logistics and deliver directly to Southeast Asian grain terminals. The world is moving fast. America, still stuck in neutral, or worse, reverse. But it's not just trade, it's logistics. America's inland waterway system, once the marvel of bulk shipping, now sees barge lines mothballing units due to reduced volume. Lock queues are empty. Fertilizer once barged up the Mississippi from the Gulf now sits stuck in port, as fewer orders justify fewer deliveries. Rail lines are slashing grain service in the plains because elevator throughput has collapsed. And with fewer exports, bulk freighters are avoiding American ports altogether. It's a feedback loop of decline. Lower volumes mean higher per-unit costs. Higher costs mean more cancellations, and around it goes. Is this sustainable? And where are the voices of the big corporations? The agribusiness titans who lobbied for trade liberalization in decades past, now largely silent. Why? Because they've hedged their bets. Many have built foreign processing facilities. They've diversified into Brazil, Argentina, Australia. While American farmers drown in debt and unsold grain, the multinationals are surviving. Thriving, even. That's the part of the story you'll never see on the quarterly investor calls. They've moved on. But can America afford to? If this is just the beginning of a broader decoupling from global food markets, what does the future look like? Will we see government-controlled export bans to protect domestic supplies? Will price controls return? Will we relive the grain embargoes of the 1970s? Except this time, the world isn't waiting on us. Now step back. Think about what's at stake here. The entire world still consumes American agriculture, from soy oil in Indian food production, to wheat in North African bread, to pork in Chinese dumplings. And yet, every single one of those links is now fraying, because trust is collapsing. Because buyers no longer see the U.S. as the most stable, most reliable partner. Because policy now changes with a tweet, a poll, or a whim. Ask yourself, how does a nation that once fed the world become a question mark? And what happens when the rest of the world answers it? Already, global institutions are rebalancing. China is accelerating domestic soybean production through new biotech programs. India is investing in dryland agriculture and food storage to insulate from American exports. Even nations like Vietnam and Egypt are diversifying grain supply to avoid dependence on any one supplier. It's a shift, not just in trade, but in geopolitical alignment. Food has always been power, and right now, America is handing that power away. So, what comes next? Will the White House step in with a New Deal-style rescue package for agriculture? Will Congress revive export incentives or shipping subsidies? Will there be an emergency rural credit facility to hold off a wave of bankruptcies? Or will we just watch, silently, as another 1,000 farms go under, another port loses service, another buyer signs with Brazil? This isn't a doomsday prediction. It's a real-time autopsy of an industry still alive, but gasping. And the longer we wait, the harder the recovery. Because you can't just snap your fingers and reassemble trust. You can't rebuild credibility once buyers have left. You can't revive a community once the school closes, the hospital downsizes, and the land is sold. This is the final moment to choose, not with slogans, but with action. with serious policy, with bold rescue, or with silence and consequences. So if you've made it this far, share this. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Let the algorithm know that this story matters. Because if we don't tell it, who will? And if we don't act, what will be left? America's fields are still fertile, but they are no longer free. Not from policy, not from debt, not from the chokehold of a global trade war that has no winner, only survivors. And the question now is, will we be one of them? This is not just a crisis, it is a reckoning, and it's already here.